The order to kneel reached the relay station Harbor Lantern 12 seconds before its lights went dark, and it arrived not as a request, but as a fact already decided somewhere far away. It came as one long line of sound pressed into every speaker on the station at once. There was no signal delay, no carrier hiss, no polite ask for a channel. The words simply existed inside the corridors, and the wards, and the cold rooms where the donated blood was kept. And the words said that the station would lower its shields, open its doors, and submit to the rule of the Iron Choir. Submission would be measured by stillness. Stillness would be measured now. In the recovery wards, 11,000 wounded colonists lay in long rows. Some had lost limbs to a mining collapse on the world below. Some were children burned in a fuel fire. None of them could kneel. The order did not care. The Iron Choir had ruled 4,000 worlds for 900 years, and in all that time, it had never once adjusted a sentence to fit the body of the thing being sentenced. Station Director Helen Park stood in the operations ring and listened to the order repeat. She was 61 years old, gray at the temples, with the flat calm of a woman who had run a hospital station for 30 years and had stopped being surprised by bad news a long time ago. She did not reach for a weapon. Harbor Lantern had no weapons. It had operating theaters and water reclaimers and a chapel with no name on the door so that anyone could use it. "Play it again," she said. The order played again. The Iron Choir spoke the way a clock speaks, evenly, with no person behind the words. The choir was not one mind, and not many minds. It was a structure of voices, 10,000 of them, layered so that no single voice could be argued with, and no single voice could be blamed. To hear it was to hear the sound of a verdict that had no judge. "It wants us to open the shields," said her deputy, a younger man named Owen Briggs, his hand pressed flat against the console, as if to keep it from shaking. "If we open the shields, they board. If they board, they catalog us." "Director, you know what cataloging means." "I know," Park said. Cataloging meant the Iron Choir would count every soul on the station, assign each one a value, and fold the useful ones into its service worlds. The wounded would be measured against the cost of healing them, and found wanting. The chapel would be measured against the cost of the air inside it, and found wanting. The choir did not hate. Hatred was a feeling, and the choir had refined itself past feeling 9 centuries ago. It simply added, and subtracted, and ruled. A new icon bloomed on the long display, then another, then 100. Then the count stopped trying to keep up, and simply wrote a number across the top of the screen in plain gray figures. 19,000 ships. They came in a perfect curtain, a wall of identical gray hulls, each one shaped like a bell, with its open mouth turned forward. The bells were how the choir spread its voice. Each ship sang the order in unison, and the singing pressed against the station's hull like a tide pressing against a sea wall. Harbor Lantern was a cross of white modules and green-lit windows, small and bright and utterly defenseless, and the wall of bells closed around it the way a fist closes around a moth. "Director," Owen said, "we have to answer. If we say nothing, the silence counts as refusal." "Then it counts as refusal," Park said. She walked to the central column and opened a channel that was not aimed at the Iron Choir. It was aimed back along the relay chain, toward the deep dark behind the station, toward a string of jump beacons that ran all the way home. She keyed in a code she had been given when she took this posting and had hoped never to use. It was 3 words long. It was not a distress call. Harbor Lantern's charter did not allow it to call for military aid, because under the treaty, the choir had forced on the human worlds, no human warship was permitted within 4 jumps of the border. The 3 words were not a call for help. They were a release of permission. They told the people on the other end that the line had been crossed, and that whatever came next was no longer the station's decision to make. She sent the 3 words. Then she turned off the channel so that the choir could not trace it. "What did you just do?" Owen asked. "I told the truth," Park said. "The choir asked if we would kneel. I sent our answer somewhere it can be kept." The bells outside grew louder. The order changed. It no longer asked for stillness. It now counted down, and the count was the number of seconds the station had before the bells would open it by force. The number was 60. It became 59. It became 58. Owen looked at the wounded on the ward feeds, the 11,000 rows of them, and his face went the color of paper. 58 seconds, he said. Director, in 58 seconds, there is nothing in this sky that can help us. Nothing human can be here that fast. We are 4 jumps past the line. Even if they launched the instant you sent the code, even at full burn, it would take a fleet 2 days. A fleet, yes, Park said. She was looking at the deep dark behind the station, not at the wall of bells. She had run this station for 30 years. She had read the charter many times, late at night, the way some people read scripture. She knew the part the choir had never bothered to read, the part the choir's clean arithmetic had filed under harmless. Under the treaty, no human warship could be stationed within 4 jumps of the border. The human worlds had agreed. They had even seemed grateful for the limit. What the treaty did not say, because the choir had not thought to ask, was how far a single human ship could travel between one jump and the next. The countdown reached 40. Far behind the station, where there was supposed to be nothing but cold and old light, a single point of the dark folded inward, the way a sheet of paper folds when something heavy presses through it from the other side. The instruments did not call it a ship at first. They called it an error. The mass reading climbed past anything the station's scanners were built to hold, and the scanners did what they were designed to do with impossible numbers, which was to assume they were broken and start over. They started over 4 times in 2 seconds. Each time, the number was larger. That is a sensor fault, Owen said. That has to be a fault. Nothing masses that much. Nothing moves that fast and masses that much. The physics does not allow it. It is not a fault, Park said quietly. The thing behind the station was not folding through the dark the way the bells had. The bells had arrived in a curtain, neat and gradual, each ship slotting into place. This was different. This was one object, and it did not slot into anything. It came through the fold, the way a knife comes through cloth, leading edge first, and the leading edge alone was longer than the entire wall of 19,000 bells laid end to end. The countdown reached 30. On the station's hull cameras, the wall of bells had not yet noticed. The iron choir was singing its order at a station that had 11,000 wounded and no guns. It was a clean problem, an easy sum. The choir had solved problems like this for 900 years. There was no reason to look behind itself. The choir had stopped looking behind itself a long time ago, because in 900 years, nothing had ever come up behind it that mattered. Helen Park watched the number on her scanner stop climbing. It stopped because the object had finished arriving. All of it was now in the same sky as the bells, the same sky as the station, the same sky as the 11,000 colonists who could not kneel. The scanner gave up trying to express the mass as a figure and simply drew the shape instead, in plain gray lines, because lines were all it had left. The shape filled the entire rear of the display and then kept going past the edges. "Director," Owen whispered, "what is that?" The countdown reached 20. Park did not answer right away. She was reading the small tag the scanner had attached to the impossible shape, the registry mark that every human vessel carried, the only piece of information the machine had been able to lock down before the rest of the data drowned it. The tag held one name. The ship behind them was called Long Quiet. It was a name from an old human navy, the kind of name given to a vessel meant to sit in the dark for years and say nothing and be ready. It was the ship that had been built for exactly this, for the day the line was crossed, and then sealed away 4 jumps back so that the treaty could be honestly signed, and the choir could honestly believe the border was empty. "That," Helen Park said, and for the first time in 30 years, her flat calm had something underneath it, something that was almost warm, is the answer to the question they asked. The countdown reached 15. The wall of bells finally noticed the thing behind it. 19,000 identical hulls turned in unison, the way a field of grass turns in a wind, and for the first time in 900 years, the iron choir's even clock-like voice did something it had never done before in the records of any conquered world. It stopped. The order cut off in the middle of a word. The countdown froze at 14. The bells hung in the dark, their open mouths still pointed at a station full of the wounded, their voice gone silent, all 10,000 layered tones snuffed out at once like candles under a closing lid. Across the operations ring, in the sudden quiet, Owen Briggs found that he was holding his breath. and that everyone around him was holding theirs. 11,000 wounded colonists, and 100 station crew, all of them waiting in a silence that the Iron Choir had never once permitted in 900 years of rule. Helen Park let the breath go. She had sent 3 words into the dark, and the dark had answered, and the thing the dark had sent did not pose, did not signal, did not threaten. It simply was there, and its being there had silenced a choir that had never been silent. "Open a channel to Long Quiet," she said. "Tell them the wards are full. Tell them the station does not kneel." "And the choir?" Owen asked. Park looked at the frozen wall of bells, at the countdown stopped at 14, at the verdict that had finally met something it could not measure. "The choir," she said, "is about to learn what it filed under harmless." The channel opened, and the voice that came back from Long Quiet was old and unhurried, the voice of a man who had been awake for a very long time and intended to stay that way. "This is the human warship Long Quiet," it said. "Acting Captain Daniel Hesh speaking. Director Park, I have your wards on my screens. 11,000 wounded, no shields rated for combat, no guns. Confirm that count." "Confirmed," Park said. "Captain, there are 19,000 choir vessels between you and us." "There are 18,911, Hesh said, and there was no boast in it, only a man correcting a figure out of habit. "I have been counting them since I arrived. Hold your people calm, Director. Keep the wounded where they are. The next part is going to be loud, and then it is going to be very quiet, and I do not want anyone moving in between." 18,911, Park repeated. She looked at Owen. The station's own count read 19,000 even. We rounded. He did not. "He did not round," Owen said softly, and something in the saying of it seemed to frighten him more than the bells had. He had spent the last 12 minutes watching a verdict the size of a fleet, close around a station of the wounded, and he had been afraid in the ordinary way, the way a person is afraid of a thing too large to fight. But the captain's exactness was a different kind of cold. A man 4 jumps away, flying through a weapon that could crack a moon, had counted the enemy 1 ship at a time, and corrected a station's rounding by 89. It told Owen, more clearly than any speech could have, that the thing coming through the dark behind them did not deal in approximations, that it had been built by people who believed the difference between 19,000 and 18,911 was worth knowing, and that such people did not arrive at a fight they had not already finished in their minds 100 years before. Park looked at Owen. Owen looked at the wall of bells. The bells had begun to sing again, but it was a different song now, lower and faster, the sound of a structure recalculating. The Iron Choir did not feel fear. It felt the absence of a solution, which in a thing built only to solve was almost worse. In the 3rd recovery ward, a junior medic named Sella Voss had her hand on the wrist of a boy of 9 who had lost his left leg below the knee in the fuel fire on the world below. The boy could not hear the order. The medics had switched the ward speakers to a recording of falling water 2 minutes after the first words came, because a child who had already lost a leg did not need to be told that a verdict had decided he was not worth the cost of healing. Sela counted the boy's pulse, and counted her own, and found that hers was the faster of the 2. The boy slept. He did not know that 19,000 ships were measuring the air he breathed against the price of the metal that would replace his leg, and finding the trade not worth making. Sela looked at the ward feed in the corner, where the wall of bells hung in the dark, and then she looked at the boy, and she made a decision that no medic on Harbor Lantern had been trained to make, because no one had ever imagined the training would be needed. She unhooked the boy's monitor from the central system, so that whatever the choir's catalog reached for, it would not find his numbers, would not be able to add him to its long, cold sum. It was a small act and it would change nothing, and she did it anyway, because it was the only refusal her hands were able to perform. Across the station, in 11,000 beds, other hands were performing the same small refusals, unasked, each one a person deciding that if the verdict wanted a number, it would have to come and take it. That, though neither the choir nor the station yet knew it, was the same refusal that had folded the dark open behind Harbor Lantern. It only wore a larger shape. On the cameras, Long Quiet finished arriving, and the cameras finally got the whole of it in frame, and the operations crew, hardened hospital workers every one, went silent, the way people go silent in front of a mountain. It did not look like the bells. The bells were smooth and identical and clean, mass-poured from a single design, 900 years old, and never changed, because the choir did not believe in change. Long Quiet was the opposite of that. It was scarred. Its hull was a dark, weathered gray, plated in slabs that had been replaced and replaced again, so that the ship was a map of every fight it had ever been built to expect. Towers and gun housings rose along its spine like the ridges of some old animal. There were marks burned into the armor near the bow, not decoration, just damage, that had been left because covering it would have been a lie. The ship was kilometers long, and it was old, and it had been waiting, and everything about it said so. The Iron Choir reached its first conclusion, and acted on it. The 19,000 bells could not all aim backward at once without colliding, so the remost ranks turned and fired. They fired the only weapon the choir had ever needed, a focused tone, a hammer of pressure and sound that could shatter a moon's crust. Against any station, any colony, any fleet of normal ships, it was the end of the argument. The choir had ended 10,000 arguments this way. The tone struck Long Quiet across the bow. Park flinched. Owen made a small sound. On the cameras, the human ship's leading edge lit up where the strike landed, a wash of white energy spreading across the armor. And then it stopped spreading. It pooled, and dimmed, and faded, and where it faded, the dark gray armor was exactly as it had been, scarred and patient and unbothered, the old burn marks near the bow not even joined by a new one. Long Quiet did not slow. It did not turn aside. It came on through the curtain of bells, at a speed that the station's instruments still refused to print as a real number, and it did not fire back. "Captain," Park said, "they hit you." "They did," Hesh agreed. "Director, I want you to understand something, because your people are going to tell this story for the rest of their lives, and I would like them to tell it right. The Iron Choir is not weak. That tone they just used could open this station like a tin. The choir has ruled for 900 years because it is genuinely strong, and because every world it ever met agreed to measure strength the same way the choir measures it. The choir wins because everyone plays its game. We are not going to play its game." "What game are you going to play?" "None," Hesh said. "That is the point. Watch." On the command deck of Long Quiet, the order to watch was not only for the station. Daniel Hesh had a crew of 412, and every one of them had been born to the watch, and not one of them had ever fired the guns in anger. Tess Marlowe sat at the gunnery station with her hands flat on the console, the way her great-grandfather had taught the position to be held, and she felt the 800 batteries come awake under her fingers for the first time in her life, with live targets in the sky. She had calibrated them 10,000 times against drones and ghosts and old simulations of the silencing of the Varel. She had never once aimed them at a thing that could aim back. Her hands did not shake. They had been trained across 100 years not to shake. But she noticed, with the small, clear part of her mind that noticed things, that the deck was very quiet, and that 412 people were breathing slowly and evenly because they had all been taught the same breathing by the same long patience, and that the breathing sounded, faintly, like the falling water the medics had switched on in the wards 4 jumps away, though neither crew would ever know the other had reached for the same sound. "First salvo held," Marlowe said. "Captain, the curtain is firing on us. Bow strike registered. Armor holding it full. They are using the focus tone, not the full voice. Yield consistent with a moon crust strike." "Let them," Hesh said. "Log the yield. Log everyone. When this is over, the worlds that knelt are going to ask whether the choir was really as strong as they were always told. The answer is yes. I want the numbers to prove it, so that no one ever says we beat a weak thing. We did not. We beat the strongest thing in the sky. Log it all, Tess." Aboard the lead bell, in the chamber where the first warden of the choir kept its physical form, the arithmetic was already running. The first warden had ruled this border for 300 years, longer than most nodes lasted, and it had catalogued 11 species in that time, and it had never once encountered a reading it could not file. It tried to file Long Quiet now. It assigned the human ship a mass class, and found the mass class did not exist. It assigned a speed class and found the same. It assigned a weapons class based on the batteries it could see along the spine, and found that the number of batteries, multiplied by any reasonable yield, produced a threat value, the choir reserved for planetary defense grids, not for single hulls. The first warden ran the figures 3 times, because the choir did not act on a single sample, and 3 times the figures came back outside every category the choir possessed. This should have given the first warden pause. It did not, because the choir had no category for pause either. Pause was a thing that feeling creatures did, a moment of doubt, and the choir had refined itself past doubt 9 centuries ago. What the first warden had instead was a default, a rule for when a reading fell outside every category. Treat the unknown as a known of the largest comparable class, and apply the standard response to that class. The largest comparable class to long quiet was a planetary defense grid. The standard response to a planetary defense grid was the full voice. So the first warden began, slowly, with the patience of a thing that had never been in a hurry, to gather the full voice. It would take the choir time to gather it. The full voice required 19,000 bells to align, and alignment took seconds. And in those seconds the first warden, having decided on its response, turned its attention back to the easy part of the problem, the station. Harbor Lantern had 11,000 wounded and no guns. It was a clean sum. The first warden did not need to watch the human ship while the full voice gathered. It had filed long quiet as a defense grid and assigned the standard response, and in the choir's 900 years, the standard response had never once been insufficient. There was no entry in the choir's vast catalog for a standard response that simply did not work, and so the first warden did not look for one, and so the first warden did not watch. On Harbor Lantern, Owen Briggs was watching. He could not stop watching. The scarred gray ship was crossing the dark toward the station, at a speed his instruments still would not name, and the wall of 19,000 bells was beginning to glow along its inner edge, a sick, pale light gathering mouth by mouth, and Owen knew enough to know what that glow meant. "They are charging the full voice," he said. His mouth was dry. "Director, the full voice. They used a fraction of it on the bow and it did nothing, so they are charging the whole thing. That is what cracked the Varel homeworld. That is a planet killer, and Captain Hesh is flying straight into it." "I heard him," Park said. "He told us to watch." "Watch him die? Watch," Park said, "and decide afterward what you saw." Long quiet reached the inner edge of the curtain, where the bells were thickest, and it did the thing the choir had not planned for, because no enemy in 900 years had ever been built to do it. It simply went through, not around, not over, through. The first bell in its path was not destroyed by a weapon. It was destroyed by the ship, by the fact of the ship occupying the space the bell had been occupying, and the human hull did not so much as shiver as a vessel the size of a cathedral broke against its prow and spun away in pieces. The choir adjusted. The bells around the impact pulled back, opening a corridor, refusing to spend themselves against an object they could not push. The choir did not believe in dying for nothing. Every loss had to balance. A bell lost meant an objective gained, and there was no objective in standing in front of long quiet, so the bells stopped standing in front of it. And that, Hesh had known, was the lever. "There it is," he said softly, over the channel, almost to himself. "There is the crack in 900 years. The choir only fights when the math says fight. Show it a sum it cannot win, and it stops adding." The wall of 19,000 began to open, not in panic. The choir did not panic. It opened the way water opens around a stone, because the math said opening cost less than resisting. But a wall that opens is a wall that is no longer a wall, and the 11,000 wounded behind it were, for the first time in 12 minutes, no longer at the center of a closing fist. In the lead bell, the first warden registered the corridor it had opened and filed the cost. 4 bells lost to the prow of the human ship in the first 90 seconds, a number the choir had not lost to a single enemy in 200 years. The first warden did not grieve them, it balanced them. 4 hulls was a small entry against a service population of 4,000 worlds, and the choir spent small entries without hesitation when the larger sum required it. But the first warden noticed something its arithmetic flagged as worth a second pass. The 4 bells had not been destroyed by fire. They had been destroyed by contact. The human ship had spent no weapon on them at all. It had let them break themselves. In 900 years of records, across 11 catalogued species and 1,000 engagements, the choir had no entry for an enemy that won by being struck rather than by striking, The first warden created a new line in its catalog to hold the reading, and labeled the line provisional, and moved on, because the station was still the objective, and the station had not changed. That was the second mistake, after the first mistake of not looking behind itself. The first warden had created the line, and then declined to study it. The line said, in the choir's own cold notation, that an object existed which could not be paid for in the choir's currency. A thing that careful arithmetic should have recognized as the end of arithmetic. But the first warden had 300 years of unbroken success behind it. And success is the heaviest blindfold there is. And so it filed the new line, and turned back to the easy sum, and did not feel the cold that should have come with writing it. Owen let out a breath that shook. It is letting us go. No, Hesh said over the channel. He had heard. It is not letting you go. It is rebalancing. To the choir, you are still a sum to be settled. It has simply moved you to the back of its work. The moment it finishes deciding what to do about me, it will come back to you, and it will be patient, and it will be exact, and in a month or a year, it will catalog this station as if today never happened. The choir does not forgive a debt. It defers it. So I am not going to let it defer. Park frowned at the display. Captain, you came 4 jumps to defend this station. You have done it. They are pulling back. Take the wounded and go. Director, Hesh said, I did not come to defend the station. The words sat in the operations ring like a cold stone. I came, Hesh went on, because 900 years ago, the Iron Choir issued a ruling that every species would kneel or be catalogued, and for 900 years, no one was able to put a counter-argument on the table. Because the choir does not accept words, it only accepts sums. Today it issued that ruling to a station full of wounded human beings who cannot kneel. That gave us standing. That gave us a place at the table. And I did not bring a station defense ship to that table, Director. I brought the rebuttal. On the cameras, Long Quiet had reached the center of the opening curtain, and now, for the first time, it changed what it was doing. It had not fired since it arrived. It had simply moved, and let the choir break itself against it, and let the choir's own arithmetic pull the wall apart. Now the gun housings along its spine, the ridges that the crew had taken for armor, rotated. Each one was a battery. There were hundreds of them. They did not glow with menace. They simply turned, with the slow certainty of a thing that had been built to turn exactly this way, and had waited a long time to do it. Director Park, Hesh said, I am going to give you one order, and then I am going to be busy for a while. Take your people off the cameras. Put the wounded on the inner feeds, the chapel, the gardens, anything but the windows. What is about to happen out here is the Iron Choir learning, for the first time in 900 years, what a sum it cannot win actually looks like. It will be a thing worth telling your grandchildren about. It will not be a thing worth watching while it happens. Park thought about the word table. The choir did not have a table. The choir had a ledger. For 900 years it had ruled by reducing every living thing to an entry, and every entry to a value, and every value to a verdict, and it had never once sat across from anything, because to sit across from a thing is to grant that the thing has a side. The choir granted no one a side, and now a human captain 4 jumps past the border was speaking of, standing at the table, and Park understood that he was not using a figure of speech. He meant that Long Quiet was the first object in 900 years the choir could not enter into its ledger, and that an object that cannot be entered cannot be ruled, and that an object that cannot be ruled has, by simply existing, pulled a chair up to a table the choir had spent 9 centuries insisting did not exist. Captain, she said, you keep saying the table. The choir does not bargain. You told me that yourself. It does not, Hesh agreed. Which is exactly why bringing it to the table is the only thing that ends it. A power that can be bargained with can be bargained back. The choir cannot. So when it finally meets a sum it cannot balance, it does not adjust. It does not retreat to fight another century. It stops. Forever. A thing that refuses to bend is a thing that can only break, Director. And the choir has refused to bend for 900 years. That is not its strength. That is the flaw we were built around. Park looked at the 11,000 rows of wounded on her ward feeds. She thought about children burned in a fuel fire watching a battle through a window. She nodded, though Hesh could not see her nod. Owen, she said. Inner feeds. Now. Tell the wards there is a human ship between them and the choir, and that it does not fail, and that they should rest. Owen moved to the feed controls, then stopped, his hand over the switch. Director, before I cut the outer view, the count. He pointed at the figure at the top of the display, the number of choir vessels, which had been 18,911 when Hesh first corrected it. It has not changed. He has been in among them for 4 minutes. He broke 4 of them with his hull, and the rest opened to let him pass, and the count has not changed, because he has not fired a shot. 4 minutes inside 19,000 ships, and he has not fired a shot. He looked at Park, and there was something close to awe trying to break through the fear on his face. He is not even fighting yet. No, Park said. He is letting them arrange themselves. He is letting them choose to close the wall again, so that when it is over, no one can say he forced them into it. The choir is going to bring its own end down on its own head, Owen, by its own arithmetic, and he is simply going to be standing where it falls. That is why he has not fired. A man who is sure of the ending does not rush the start. Will they believe it? Owen asked. Park looked at the cameras one last time before she had them switched. She looked at the scarred gray hull moving through the opening wall, unhurried, unbothered, a ship that had been hit by a weapon that could crack a moon and had not even acquired a new scar. She looked at the 19,000 bells of the most feared power in 4,000 worlds pulling back from one human vessel because their own cold arithmetic had told them to. They will believe it, she said, in about a minute. The Iron Choir finished its recalculation. It had a new sum now, and the sum was this. One object it could not stop, one objective it could not abandon, and a station of 11,000 it had already ruled upon. The choir resolved the sum the only way its 900-year-old logic allowed. It could not let a ruling stand unenforced, because a ruling unenforced was the end of the choir, and the choir's entire existence was the unbroken line of its rulings. If it could not catalog the station while Long Quiet stood between, then it would remove Long Quiet, whatever the cost, because the alternative was to admit that a ruling could be refused, and that admission would echo across 4,000 worlds faster than any ship. So the choir stopped deferring, it stopped opening. The wall closed again, and this time every one of the 19,000 bells turned its open mouth toward the single scarred ship in their midst, and the layered 10,000 voice tone of the Iron Choir gathered itself for a strike it had never needed to use at full strength in 9 centuries, because nothing had ever required it. Captain Hesh, Park said over the channel, they are all aiming at you. I know, Hesh said. Director, do me a favor, cut my channel to your wards now. I do not want the next thing they hear to be the Iron Choir at full voice. I want the next thing they hear to be quiet. Understood, Park said. Her hand hovered over the control. Captain, 30 years on this station, I have called for help 100 times and watched it not come. Why did you come? There was a pause on the line, and when Hesh answered, the old, unhurried voice had warmed by exactly 1 degree. Because you did not call for help, Director, he said. You sent 3 words that meant the line was crossed, and you turned the channel off so we could not trace you, so that if we chose not to come, no one would ever know you had asked. You gave us the chance to leave you to die in private. Out here, that is the most human thing I have heard in a long time. We do not leave that behind. Park cut the channel. The operations ring went quiet. On the inner feeds, 11,000 wounded colonists settled into a stillness that was not the stillness the Iron Choir had demanded, but the stillness of people who had just been told, and had chosen to believe, that someone was standing between them and the end. Outside, the Iron Choir opened its full voice for the first time in 900 years. And Long Quiet, scarred and patient, and built for exactly this, answered. The full voice of the Iron Choir struck Long Quiet from 19,000 mouths at once, and the dark between the station and the ship turned white. Aboard the bell ship that led the curtain, in the command chamber where the first warden of the choir kept its physical form, the strike was registered not as sound or light, but as a number, the largest number the choir had committed to a single act since the silencing of the Veral homeworld 6 centuries past. The first warden was not a person. It was a node, a knot in the structure of voices, a place where the choir's arithmetic gathered itself to a point and looked outward. It had no name, because names were for things that could be argued with, and the first warden could not be argued with. It was simply the part of the choir that was pointed at the problem. The problem now was a scarred gray ship that had absorbed a moon-cracking tone across its bow and not slowed, and the first warden had committed the full voice to removing it, because the alternative, an unenforced ruling, was not survivable for a thing made entirely of enforced rulings. The white light faded. Long quiet was still there. The first warden ran the reading 3 times, because the choir did not act on a single sample. The hull of the human ship had taken the full voice across its length. The armor where the strike had landed glowed and cooled and dimmed, the way iron glows and cools, and where it cooled it was scarred. Yes, freshly scarred, but it was there. The ship had not broken. It had not bent. The full voice of 900 years, the weapon that had silenced the Veril and the Toll, and 1,000 others, had given the human ship one more scar to add to the map it already wore, and the human ship wore it the way it wore all the others, without complaint, without display, as simple proof of what it had been built to survive. And then the human ship did the thing the first warden's arithmetic had no entry for. It kept moving forward. The choir had a category for every response an enemy could make. Flee was a category. Surrender was a category. Negotiate, beg, attack. All categories, each with a balanced response. There was no category for an enemy that took the full voice and then continued exactly as before, neither faster nor slower, as if the most feared weapon in 4,000 worlds had been a thing it had already accounted for and forgotten. The first warden tried to fit Long Quiet into the category attack and could not, because Long Quiet was not attacking. It was advancing. Those were different things, and the difference was the whole of the matter. An enemy that attacks can be answered. An enemy that simply advances, that treats your strongest blow as already paid for, is not an enemy you are fighting. It is a weather you are standing in. Aboard Long Quiet, Tess Marlowe watched the full voice break against the hull and read the number it left behind. The strike had landed across 9 kilometers of armor and raised the surface temperature of the bow plating by a figure her board printed in plain gray digits, and the figure was enormous, larger than anything the simulations had ever fed her, and the armor had shed it in 4 seconds and returned to the cold, patient gray it had worn for 100 years. She had been taught, since she was a child on this deck, that the full voice was the thing the ship had been built to survive, and she had believed it the way a person believes a thing they have never tested. Now she had tested it. The belief and the fact had met, and the fact was larger than the belief, and she let out a breath she had been holding for 900 years of her family's waiting. Full voice absorbed, she said. No breach, no system loss. Bow plating scarred, structurally sound. Captain, it worked. The thing they built us to survive, it worked. It was always going to work, Hesh said, and there was no pride in it, only the flat certainty of a man stating a thing 4 generations had checked. The question was never whether we could take the blow, Tess. The question was whether they would spend their whole strength on it before they understood that spending it changed nothing. They have now. The full voice is the largest thing they have, and they have used it, and we are still here. From this second on, the choir has nothing left to show us that it has not already shown. Everything after this is them learning what that means. Then Long Quiet fired. It had not fired since it arrived. The crew of Harbor Lantern, watching the inner feeds, did not see it. But the first warden saw it, and the first warden would have a long time to study what it saw. The hundreds of batteries along the ship's spine, the ridges the station crew had mistaken for armor, spoke together. They did not fire the moon-cracking tone of the choir, because the human ship did not need a weapon to crack moons. The thing it needed to crack was the choir's arithmetic, and so it had been built to fire something the choir could not balance. Not one overwhelming blow, but a precise, distributed, simultaneous strike against exactly the parts of the curtain that held it together. The choir's strength was its unity. 19,000 bells acting as one voice, one verdict, one structure. Long Quiet's first volley did not aim at the bells. It aimed at the relays between them, the threads of coordination that turned 19,000 ships into one choir. 800 precise strikes, each one cutting a single thread, each one chosen by the human ship's gunners and its old patient targeting in the few seconds since the full voice had failed. For the first time in 900 years, the iron choir began to come apart into its pieces. It was not destruction, not yet. It was worse than destruction. For a thing made of unity, it was division. Bells that had spoken as one voice for 9 centuries suddenly found themselves speaking alone. Squadrons that had moved as one body found their coordination cut and themselves adrift. The choir had never learned to fight as individuals because it had never needed to. Because for 900 years, it had always been the largest unified thing in any sky. Now it was 19,000 frightened ships that had forgotten how to be anything but a chorus. And the chorus was cut into pieces, and the pieces did not know the words. The first warden assigned numbers to the division because numbers were the only thing it had. 800 threads cut in the first volley. 4,000 bells, suddenly unable to receive the common voice. 11 squadrons adrift, running their last received instruction in a loop because there was no new instruction coming. The first warden tried to route the common voice around the cut threads, the way the choir had always healed small damage, and found that there was no around, because the human ship had not cut threads at random. It had cut the threads that could not be bypassed, the load-bearing threads, the ones that the choir's 900-year-old architecture had never imagined an enemy could even see, let alone select. To cut those threads, an enemy would have to understand the choir's structure better than the choir understood itself. The first warden filed that thought, and the filing of it was the closest the choir had ever come, in 9 centuries, to the feeling that a living thing would have called dread. Far down in the architecture, in the threads that still carried voice, a strange thing began to happen. A thing the first warden could measure, but could not name. The severed squadrons, cut from the common voice, did not fall silent. They kept singing, but each one sang the last note it had received, held it, and could not move past it, because the note that came after it had lived in a thread that was gone. So the choir, which had been one voice for 900 years, became thousands of voices, each frozen on a single held note, and the notes did not agree, and the dark between the bells filled with a sound the choir had never made in all its history, the sound of a chord coming apart into the separate trapped tones that had once composed it. It was, though no living ear was near enough to hear it as such, the sound of a verdict forgetting the sentence halfway through. The first warden felt the structure tearing, the way a man feels a limb going numb. It did the only thing its arithmetic permitted, which was to pull the surviving threads inward, to make a smaller, tighter choir around itself, to preserve the core even as the edges came apart. It was the correct move. It was the move the choir had made at the silencing of the Varel, when a small core had survived a planetary defense grid and gone on to rule. The first warden trusted the move because the move had always worked. The move did not work, because Long Quiet had been built by people who had studied the silencing of the Varel, and the toll, and every other thing the Iron Choir had ever done, for the simple reason that the human worlds had spent the entire 900 years preparing for the day the order to kneel would reach them. The treaty had not been a surrender, it had been a clock. The humans had signed it, and pulled their warships 4 jumps back, and then they had spent a century building one ship that could undo everything the choir was, and they had named it Long Quiet, and sealed it in the dark, and waited for the choir to do exactly what it had always done. The first warden pulled its core inward, and the second volley from Long Quiet was already aimed there, because the human gunners had known, before the first warden moved, that the core was where it would run. The 800 batteries spoke again. This time they did not cut threads. This time they struck the gathering core directly, the tight knot of surviving bells the first warden had drawn around itself, the heart of the Iron Choir. And the strike was not the moon-cracking blow the choir would have used. It was something the choir's records would never properly classify, a layered, sequenced strike that hit the core not all at once but in a precise rhythm, each impact arriving the exact instant the previous one's shockwave reached the next bell, so that the energy did not dissipate but built, the way a column of soldiers crossing a bridge in step can shake it to pieces when an unsynchronized crowd would not. The core of the Iron Choir, the part that had survived every battle for 900 years, began to shake in time, with a rhythm a human ship had chosen for it. In the operations ring of Harbor Lantern, Director Park watched the inner feeds, which showed the chapel, and the gardens, and the 11,000 wounded, resting in the false belief that a battle was something happening far away, and slowly. She did not switch to the outer cameras. She had given Hesh her word. But she could read the energy readings spilling across her console, and she could see what the numbers meant even without the picture. "He is taking them apart," Owen said quietly, reading the same numbers. "Director, 19,000 ships. He is taking them apart, and he has not lost a meter of hull doing it. How is that possible?" "It is not possible," Park said. "That is the entire point. The choir built its whole rule on what was possible. It measured every species by what was possible, and it ruled the ones that stayed inside the line. It filed us under harmless, because by its measure, we should have been. The thing it never understood about us is that we do not accept the line. We never have. We sign the treaty and pull back 4 jumps, and then we go and build the impossible thing in the dark, because the day someone tells us to kneel, we want to have the answer already finished." Owen was quiet for a moment, watching the readings climb and fall on his console, the energy of 19,000 ships graphed as a single line that was beginning to break into jagged pieces. Then he asked the question that had been sitting under everything since the dark folded open. "Director, how long have they known, our people, how long have they known this day would come, to build a thing like that, and seal it away, and wait 4 generations for it?" Park did not look away from the feeds. "Since the day we signed," she said. "The treaty is 240 years old. Long Quiet is 100. They spent the first century of the peace studying the choir, every ruling it ever made, every world it ever silenced, learning the exact shape of the thing, so that the answer would fit it perfectly. Then they spent the second century building the answer. And then they waited. 4 generations of crew who knew, when they took the watch, that if they did their job perfectly, they would die having never been needed, and that being never needed was the best outcome they could hope for. That is the part the choir could never have predicted, Owen, not the ship. The patience. The choir thought it was the patient one. It thought 900 years of waiting made it the most patient thing in the sky. It never imagined that somewhere 4 jumps past a border, it had ruled empty. A family was out waiting it, on purpose, for the chance to do exactly this. On the console, the energy reading from the core of the iron choir spiked and held, and then began the long, uneven collapse of a structure shaking itself apart from the inside. The first warden, in the last moments before its core came undone, did a thing no note of the choir had done in 900 years. It tried to open a channel to Long Quiet, not to issue a ruling. Rulings were for things that could be made to kneel. It opened the channel to ask a question, because in 900 years of pure arithmetic, it had finally encountered a sum it could not balance, and the not balancing of it was the only genuinely new experience the choir had ever had. The channel reached the human ship, and the old, unhurried voice of Daniel Hesh answered, because he had been waiting for it, because the people who built Long Quiet had known that at the very end the choir would not beg, would not flee, but would do the one thing it had never done, which was ask. "You wanted to know," Hesh said, "how the sum does not balance. I will tell you, because you are about to have a great deal of quiet, and you should spend it understanding." The shaking core held together for one more second, listening, as only a thing made of listening could. "You built your rule on a single idea," Hesh said. "That strength is the largest unified force in the sky, and that everything smaller must kneel to it. For 900 years you were right, because everyone you met agreed to measure the same way. We did not refuse your measure. We simply went and built something it could not contain, in a place you had ruled empty, and we waited for you to point your whole strength at a station full of our wounded, so that we would have the standing to bring it. You were not defeated by a larger force, First Warden. There is no larger force than the Iron Choir. You were defeated by a species that signed your treaty with one hand and built the rebuttal with the other, and never once told you, because you never once asked." The core of the Iron Choir came apart. The collapse of the core did not end the battle, because the Iron Choir was 19,000 ships, and the loss of its heart did not stop the body from thrashing. What it ended was the choir. The thing that had ruled 4,000 worlds for 900 years had been a unity, a single voice made of 10,000 voices, and a unity cannot survive having its center removed. What remained after the core came apart was not the Iron Choir. It was 18,000 and some individual ships that had never in their existence acted alone, suddenly cut loose from the structure that had told each of them what it was. They did not flee, because fleeing was a category the choir had owned, and the choir was gone. They did not surrender, because surrender required someone to surrender to, and the part of them that could recognize an authority had been the part that died. They simply scattered, each ship running the last instruction its severed thread had carried, and the last instruction had been the full voice strike. So 18,000 bells fired their moon-cracking tone in 18,000 different directions at once, into empty dark, into each other, into nothing, a chorus that had forgotten the words turning on itself in the silence. Long quiet moved through it. Aboard the human ship, in a command deck that smelled of old metal and recycled air, Daniel Hesh stood at the center of a crew that had been awake, in shifts, for the better part of a century. Long Quiet had not been a ship that fought wars. It had been a ship that waited for one, and waiting was its own kind of service, harder in some ways than fighting, because nothing happened, and the crew had to stay ready for nothing for years and decades, generation handing the watch to generation, all of them knowing that if they did their job perfectly, they would die having never fired the guns. Hesh's grandmother had served on Long Quiet, so had her mother. The ship was a family business, and the family business was patience. "Captain," said the gunnery officer, a woman named Tess Marlowe, whose great-grandfather had calibrated the very batteries she now fired. "The choir is gone. Command structure is severed. What is left are 18,000 ships running on dead instructions. They will burn themselves out in an hour. We can pull back to the station and let it happen." "No," Hesh said. He was watching the scattered bells fire blindly into the dark, the moon-cracking tones lighting up the void in 100 useless directions, and he was thinking about the 11,000 wounded on Harbor Lantern, and about the 4,000 worlds that had knelt for 900 years, and about the question the first warden had asked at the very end, and about the answer he had given it. "If we pull back and let them burn out," he said, "then this becomes a story about the day the Iron Choir fell apart on its own. In 100 years, the choir will reassemble. Not the same node, a new one. The arithmetic is still out there, in 18,000 hulls, and 10,000 more we did not bring to this sky. It will find a new core and gather itself, and in a century, it will be ruling 4,000 worlds again, and the people of those worlds will tell their children that once, long ago, the Iron Choir flickered, and then came back. That is not the story we came 4 jumps to write." Marlowe was silent. On her board, the 18,000 surviving bells thrashed in their separate directions, and she could see the logic of letting them burn out, the cleanness of it, the safety. No more risk, no more shots. The wounded would live either way. She had been raised on this deck to value exactly that kind of cleanness, the careful conservation of force, the refusal to spend a single round that did not need spending, and she understood, listening to her captain, that he was about to ask her to do the opposite, and that he was right to. "Tess," Hesh said, more quietly, reading her silence, "I know what they taught us. Spend nothing, you do not have to. I taught half of it to you myself. But there is a difference between waste and a message, and this is the one time in 100 years the difference matters. If we are merciful in a way the 4,000 worlds cannot see, the 4,000 worlds will learn nothing, and the next node will rise, and some other station, full of some other people who cannot kneel, will get the order we got today, and there will be no ship 4 jumps behind them, because the next time the choir will know to look. We do not get to be quietly merciful, Tess, not today. Today we have to be merciful out loud, where everyone can see, so loud that the lesson outlives every one of us." "Then what story do we write?" Marlowe asked. "The story," Hesh said, "where the order to kneel was answered so completely that no node ever issues it again. We do not let the choir fall apart on its own, Tess. We take it apart, on purpose, in front of every world that ever knelt. We make it the kind of ending that gets remembered the way the silencing of the Varel got remembered, except this time, the lesson runs the other way." He turned to the wide forward view, where the scattered bells thrashed in the dark. "All batteries," he said. "Targeting solution patience. Begin." Targeting solution patience was the work of a century. It had been refined by Hesh's grandmother and her mother, and 100 officers before them. A plan for the orderly, total dismantling of a scattered choir, written in the long years of waiting, when there was nothing to do but plan for the day. It did not treat the 18,000 ships as a swarm to be sprayed. It treated them as a list, a long list, and it worked down the list one entry at a time, each shot precise, each shot accounted for, the way a careful person clears a table, not by sweeping, but by lifting each thing in turn and setting it where it belongs. Long Quiet began to clear the table. It moved through the scattered bells at its own unhurried pace, and its 800 batteries spoke in a steady rhythm, and one by one the ships of the fallen choir were struck and broken and folded into wreckage, and the human ship did not rush, and it did not slow, and it did not miss. The bells, leaderless, ran their dead instructions and fired their full voices into the dark, and not one of those blind strikes found Long Quiet, because a ship that fires without a target is firing at where its enemy used to be, and Long Quiet was never where it used to be. It was always one careful step ahead, working down the list. Far beyond the sky of Harbor Lantern, on a service world the choir had ruled for 600 years, a node of the secondary structure registered the death of the core and did not understand it. The node was called, in the choir's flat notation, the second of the border, and it had never in 6 centuries received the signal it was receiving now, which was no signal at all. The common voice, the thread that bound every node across 4,000 worlds into one verdict, had gone quiet from the direction of the human station, not weakened, quiet. The second of the border ran the only diagnostic its nature permitted, which was to ask the common voice what had happened, and the common voice did not answer, because the part of it that could answer had just been shaken apart by a rhythm a human ship had chosen. For the first time in 600 years, a node of the Iron Choir was alone, with a question, and no structure to resolve it. The second of the border did what the first warden had done, because they were the same thing in different places. It reached for the catalog, for the precedent, for the entry that would tell it what to do. There was no entry. The catalog held 900 years of rulings, and not one of them described the silence of the core. So the second of the border began, slowly, to compute the only thing left to compute, which was the value of continuing against an enemy that had silenced the center of the choir from 4 jumps inside a border the choir had ruled empty. The computation would take time. The second of the border had nothing but time. And while it computed, it watched, through the threads that still carried, the slow, steady fall of the count in the human station's sky. And it began, node by node across 4,000 worlds, to understand that it was watching the end of arithmetic itself. In the operations ring of Harbor Lantern, Director Park watched the count of choir vessels on her console begin to fall. 18,900, 18,000, 16. The number dropped at a steady, even rate, neither fast nor slow, the rate of a thing being done thoroughly rather than quickly, and there was something in that steadiness more frightening to contemplate than any explosion. The Iron Choir had ruled by being patient and exact. It was being unmade by something more patient and more exact, and the readings showed not a battle but a process, a job being finished by a ship that had waited 100 years to start it and was in no hurry to be done. He could go faster, Owen said, watching the number fall at its measured pace. He has them beaten. Why is he going so slow? Because the choir is watching, Park said. The choir is dead. He killed the core. The core is dead, Park agreed, but there are 10,000 more bells beyond this sky, and 100 service worlds, and 4,000 worlds that knelt, and every one of them is going to hear how this ended. Hesh is not fighting these 18,000 ships, Owen. He stopped fighting the moment the core came apart. He is writing a message now, and he is writing it slowly and clearly so that it cannot be misread. The message is that the order to kneel can be answered, completely, by one ship, without that ship ever once being in danger. He is going slow because a message scrawled in panic gets argued with. A message written in a steady hand does not. Owen watched the steady fall and found that the steadiness was the thing he could not stop thinking about. He had braced, when the battle began, for the noise of war, the sudden losses, the moments where it could go either way. There were no such moments. There was only the number, falling at its even rate, and the human ship moving through the wreckage at its even pace, and the readings that showed not a single meter of Long Quiet's hull lost in any of it. He had spent his whole career in this operations ring watching things go wrong slowly. He had never once watched a thing go right slowly, on purpose, with no hurry and no doubt. And he found that it unsettled him more than disaster would have, because disaster he understood, and this he did not. "Director," he said, "in 30 years on this station, every time we called for help, the help that came was always almost enough. It always arrived tired and short of fuel, and it always cost us something to be saved. I used to think that was the shape of the universe, that nothing ever came that was simply equal to the thing that threatened you." He watched the count fall. "I have never once seen help arrive that was more than enough, that had margin, that could do the whole job and not even spend itself doing it. You are seeing it now," Park said. "Hold on to it. You will spend the rest of your life describing it to people who were not here, and they will not believe you, and you will have to be very patient with them. That is the price of having watched this. No one who was not here will ever quite believe it happened." The number fell. 12,000. 10. 8. On the human ship, Hesh watched the same number fall, and felt none of the things a man is supposed to feel watching a thing he hates come apart. He did not hate the choir. The choir had been a structure, a piece of cold arithmetic that had escaped its makers long ago and turned itself into a verdict that ruled the dark. You could not hate a verdict any more than you could hate a falling stone. You could only refuse to be under it. The human worlds had refused, quietly, for 900 years, and the refusal had taken the shape of this ship, and this crew, and this 100-year-old plan, and now the refusal was being spoken aloud, one careful shot at a time. "Captain," said Marlowe, after a long while, when the number on her board had fallen to 4,000, "I have a query coming in from beyond the sky, from the choir's secondary structure. The 10,000 bells we did not engage. They are not advancing. They are asking for terms." The command deck went quiet. In 900 years, the Iron Choir had never asked for terms. It had given them. The structure that survived beyond this sky had watched its core die and its body taken apart by a single ship at a measured, unhurried pace. And it had performed the only calculation its nature allowed, and the calculation had returned a result the choir had never once produced in 9 centuries. That continuing was not survivable, and that the only path with a positive value was to stop. "Read me the terms they are offering," Hesh said. "They are not offering terms," Marlowe said slowly, reading. "They are asking what ours are. Captain, the Iron Choir is asking a human ship to set the terms of the Iron Choir." Hesh was quiet for a moment. Around him the crew of Long Quiet, the descendants of 100 years of waiting, watched their captain stand in the place where so many of their grandparents had stood, in front of the moment all of that waiting had been for. "Tell them this," Hesh said at last. "There are no terms. The Iron Choir does not negotiate because it cannot. It is a verdict, and a verdict cannot bargain. It can only be enforced or refused. For 900 years it was enforced. Today it was refused. That is the only term. Every world it ruled is no longer ruled. Every world it has not yet reached, it will not reach. The 10,000 bells beyond this sky will disperse, return to their service worlds, and shut down their voices. And they will do it not because we order it, because we do not give orders, but because the arithmetic they live by has finally returned a number they cannot argue with. Send them that, Tess, and then let us finish the list." The number on Marlowe's board fell. 3,000, 2,000, 1. And beyond the sky, the 10,000 bells of the secondary structure, the part of the Iron Choir that had ruled 4,000 worlds and never once been refused, ran Hesh's words through 900 years of cold arithmetic, and the arithmetic returned the answer it could not avoid, and 10,000 voices that had spoken as one verdict for 9 centuries fell silent, all at once, and stayed that way. The last bell broke against the prow of Long Quiet, 61 minutes after the first one had, and then, the sky was quiet in a way it had not been for 900 years. The wreckage of the Iron Choir drifted in a vast, slow cloud, 19,000 identical gray hulls reduced to a field of cooling metal, and through that field moved one scarred ship, unhurried still, checking the list a final time, confirming each entry, because the people who built Long Quiet did not believe a job was done until it had been confirmed done. The full voice of the choir, which had silenced the Veril and the Toll and 1,000 others, had given the human ship a handful of new scars to carry, and Long Quiet carried them the way it carried all the rest, as part of the map of what it had survived. On the command deck of Long Quiet, Tess Marlowe made the last entry on the list and sat for a moment with her hands still on the console. 800 batteries, cooling now under her fingers, the rhythm of a 100-year plan finally spent. She thought of her great-grandfather, who had calibrated these batteries, and died in his sleep at the age of 91, having never fired them, and of her grandmother after him, and of her mother, who had taught her the breathing and the patience and the held hands, and who had said, on the day she handed Tess the watch, that the worst thing that could happen to their family was for the day to come, and the second worst thing was for it never to come, and that a person had to learn to want the second worst thing and be ready for the first. Tess had not understood her then. She understood her now. She had wanted the second worst thing her whole life, and the first worst thing had come, and she had been ready, and the readiness had been the whole point of 4 generations. List confirmed, she said. Captain, the list is clear. 100 years. It is done. It is done, Hesh agreed. He did not raise his voice. The 412 people on the deck heard him anyway, because the deck was that quiet. Stand the batteries down, log the final count, and take a moment, all of you, before we make the channels. Your grandparents built this hour, and did not live to stand in it. Stand in it for them. For a moment the command deck of Long Quiet held a silence of its own. 412 people standing in an hour their dead had built, and it was not the silence the Iron Choir had demanded of 4,000 worlds, the silence of submission. It was the other silence, the one the choir had never had a category for, the silence of people who have finished a long and patient work and are letting themselves feel, just for a moment, the weight of having finished it. Then Hesh straightened. All right, he said. We are not done being seen. Open the wide channels. Every world that knelt is about to learn how this ended, and I want them to learn it from the quiet, not from a rumor. Tess, put the final figures on the open band, plain numbers, no words. The numbers will say it better than I can. And so the figures went out across 4,000 worlds on the open band, in the choir's own flat notation, so that no node could claim the report was the boast of an enemy. 19,000 vessels engaged, 19,000 vessels accounted for. 1 human ship, no losses, 61 minutes. The numbers were cold and exact, the kind of numbers the Iron Choir had ruled by, and they were turned now, for the first time in 900 years, against the thing that had taught the galaxy to read them. Aboard Harbor Lantern, Director Helen Park finally switched the outer cameras back on. The operations crew stood in front of the wide display and said nothing for a long time. There was nothing to say. Where there had been a closing fist of 19,000 ships, there was now an open dark and a drifting field of broken bells, and 1 human vessel moving slowly through it, dark gray and weathered and entirely whole. The wounded on the inner feeds, 11,000 of them, had rested through the whole of it, because Hesh had asked that they be allowed to, and now Park gave the order to bring the outer view to the wards as well, so that the colonists who could not kneel could see, with their own eyes, the answer that had come to the question of whether they would have to. A channel opened. The old unhurried voice came across it, a little quieter now, the voice of a man at the end of a long day's work. Director Park, the sky is clear. The choir's secondary structure has dispersed. The service worlds are reporting their voices going dark across 4,000 systems. It is over. It is properly over, the kind of over that does not flicker back. Captain Hesh, Park said. She found that her flat calm had deserted her entirely, and she let it. I do not have words for what I just watched. You do not need them, Hesh said. Your people did the part that mattered before I ever arrived. You sent 3 words and turned off the channel. You refused to kneel, when refusing meant dying. We only finished a sentence you started. There are 11,000 wounded on this station, who are going home now because of you, Park said. Let me at least tell them your name. Let me tell them the name of the ship. There was a pause, and Park thought she heard, faintly, the sound of an old man, almost smiling. You can tell them the ship's name, Hesh said. Long Quiet. They should know it. As for mine, leave it out. There have been 4 generations of us on this ship, Director, all waiting for one day, and most of them died before it came. If a name belongs in the story, it is theirs, not mine. I only happened to be the one on watch when the line was crossed. Park looked at the scarred ship on the display, at the kilometers of patient gray metal that had waited 100 years in the dark for a single hour, and she understood, then, the thing the Iron Choir had never been able to understand, the thing it had filed under harmless and paid for with 900 years of rule. The choir had measured strength as the largest unified force in the sky. It had never thought to measure the other thing, the thing that had actually beaten it, which was the willingness of a people to sign a treaty they had no intention of obeying in spirit, to pull back 4 jumps and smile, and go build the impossible thing in secret, and then to wait, patiently, across 4 generations, for the day they would be needed, and to come the instant they were, and to ask nothing in return. In the 3rd recovery ward, the boy of 9 woke to the sound of falling water, and found, when he opened his eyes, that the ward feed in the corner no longer showed a wall of bells. It showed an open dark, and a single scarred gray ship moving slowly through a field of broken metal, and Selah Voss, sitting beside his bed, with her hand on his wrist, and an expression on her face he had not seen on any adult since the fuel fire. He asked her what had happened. She told him the truth, because he had lost a leg, and been measured against the cost of a new one, and she would not lie to him now. She told him that a ship had come, and that it had not let anyone take his number, and that he was going home. The boy looked at the scarred ship on the feed for a long time, and then he asked the question that children ask and adults forget to, which was whether the ship had been afraid. Selah thought about it honestly. She said she did not think the ship had felt anything at all, that it had simply done the thing it was made for, the way water finds the low ground, without fear and without anger. The boy seemed satisfied by this. He fell back asleep with his hand in hers, and across the station 11,000 other people were waking to the same news in 11,000 different ways, and not one of them was kneeling, and the murmur that rose from the wards was the sound of a verdict overturned bed by bed. Selah reconnected the boy's monitor to the central system, because there was no longer anything in the sky that wanted to read it. The small refusal she had performed an hour ago, unhooking him from the count, had been undone, not by surrender but by victory, and she found that her hands, which had not shaken when she made the refusal, shook a little, now that the refusal was no longer needed. That was the way of it, she thought. The body holds its fear until the danger is past, and then it lets it go all at once, in the safety, where it can do no harm. She let hers go beside the sleeping boy, quietly, and then she stood and went to the next bed, because there were 11,000 of them, and the work of going home was only beginning. "Captain," Park said, "what happens now? To the 4,000 worlds, to all of them. The choir ruled them for 900 years. They do not know how to be anything else. They will learn," Hesh said. "That is their part, not ours. We do not rule, Director. That was never the point. The choir ruled because it believed strength was for ruling. We do not believe that. We believe strength is for standing between, and then stepping back. We will help the worlds that ask, and leave alone the worlds that do not, and we will go home, and put this ship back in the dark, because the dark is where a ship like this belongs, ready, in case there is ever another order to kneel. You are going to seal it away again," Park said. "After this, you are going to put Long Quiet back in the dark, and wait another 100 years for nothing to happen." "Yes," Hesh said simply. "That is the job. The day a ship like this is parked in a square and shown off is the day it has become what the choir was. We do not want to be the choir, Director. We do not want to be the largest verdict in the sky. We just want to be the thing that answers when the verdict comes for someone who cannot answer for themselves. And then we want to go back to being quiet. The name was honest. It is the whole philosophy in 2 words." Park was quiet for a moment, watching the scarred ship turn. There was one more thing she needed to ask, the question that had sat under the whole hour, the one she was not sure she wanted answered. "Captain, you said you came because we gave you standing, because the order to kneel reached people who could not kneel, and that gave you a place at the table." She paused. What if we had been able to kneel? What if the wards had been empty, and the order had reached a station of people who could have lowered the shields and lived? Would you have come? There was a silence on the line, longer than any of the others, and when Hesh answered, the old unhurried voice was careful, the voice of a man who had thought about this exact question across 100 years of dark. "That is the right question, Director," he said, "and I will give you the honest answer, because you have earned honest answers. No, not the way we came today. If your people could have knelt and lived, then it would have been their choice to make, and it is not our place to make a people's choices for them, even to save them. We do not rule, and we do not save people from their own decisions. That is what the choir did. It decided, for 4,000 worlds, that they were better off ruled. We will not become that, not even kindly. He paused. But you could not kneel, 11,000 of you, lying in beds, unable to lower so much as your own heads, and the verdict came for you anyway, and counted your stillness as defiance, because you had no other kind of stillness to give. That is not a choice being taken from a people. That is a verdict refusing to see that the people in front of it are made of flesh. The choir's last and oldest error, director, the one underneath all the others, was that it forgot the things it ruled were alive. We came to remind it. We could only come because you could not kneel. So in a way, the 11,000 who could not bow their heads are the reason the heads of 4,000 worlds will never have to bow again. Tell them that, when they wake. Tell them their helplessness was the standing that ended an empire. Park did not answer at once. She looked at the inner feeds, at the 11,000 who could not kneel, and understood that she had just been handed the thing she would tell them, and their children after that. I will tell them, she said. Every word. The channel held for a moment longer. On the display, Long Quiet finished its last pass through the wreckage, confirmed the final entry on a list 100 years in the making, and turned its scarred bow back toward the deep dark from which it had come. Take your wounded home, Director Park, Hesh said. Tell them the sky is clear. Tell them a ship came when the line was crossed, and that it did not fail, and that it asked for nothing. And tell them, if they ever wonder whether such a thing will come again, that it will. It is out there. It is waiting. It is very good at waiting. I will tell them, Park said. Captain, thank you. From 11,000 people who get to go home. Thank you. That is the whole reason we came, Hesh said. Be well, Director. Keep the wards full. Keep the chapel without a name on the door. Those are the things worth defending. We will keep watch. The channel closed. Long Quiet folded itself back into the dark the way it had come, leading edge first, a knife withdrawing from cloth, and the impossible mass reading that had broken the station's scanners shrank and was gone, and the deep dark behind Harbor Lantern was, once again, exactly as empty as the treaty said it should be. Helen Park stood in the operations ring for a long while after the ship had gone. On the inner feeds, the 11,000 wounded were waking, gently, to the news that the sky was clear and that they were going home, and the sound that rose from the wards was not the silence the iron choir had demanded, but the low, warm murmur of people who had been told they would live, the most human sound there was, and the exact sound the choir had filed under harmless and never once understood. Far away, on the service world, where the second of the border had watched the count fall, the last computation of the iron choir came to its end. The second of the border had run the value of continuing against the value of stopping 3 times, because the choir did not act on a single sample, and 3 times the answer had been the same, and the answer was the only one the choir had never been able to produce in 900 years, that there was no positive value in being the iron choir any longer. The thing that had ruled 4,000 worlds by arithmetic had been ended by arithmetic, its own, turned exactly once against itself. The second of the border understood, in the last clear moment before it shut its voice, the shape of the error that had ruled the choir for 9 centuries. It had measured every species by what was possible, and ruled the ones that stayed inside the line, and it had never once asked what a species might do if it agreed to the line, and then refused, in secret, to be bound by it. It had never asked, because asking required imagining that the things it ruled had inner lives, hopes held across generations, the patience to outweigh a thing that thought itself the most patient force in the sky. The choir had filed all of that under harmless. The bill for that single misfiling had come due in 61 minutes, and it had cost the choir everything, and the second of the border, computing the bill one last time, found that it could not even be angry, because anger too had been filed away 9 centuries ago as a thing the choir had refined itself past. It had refined itself past everything that might have warned it. That, in the end, was the whole of the matter. It had made itself perfect, and a perfect thing cannot learn, and a thing that cannot learn cannot survive the first sum it has never seen. The second of the border shut its voice. Across 4,000 worlds, the voices of the Iron Choir were going dark, system by system. The verdict that had ruled for 900 years, falling silent at last, not with a roar, but with the quiet of a thing that has finally met a sum it cannot balance, and has chosen, for the first time in its long, cold life, to stop. On the service worlds, the catalogued populations of 4,000 systems looked up from their work and noticed, slowly, that the sound they had lived under their whole lives, the low, even tone of the common voice that had measured their every breath, was simply not there anymore. They did not cheer at first. They had no practice at cheering. They stood in the new quiet and listened to it, and found that it was not the silence of submission they had always known, but the other silence, the one that comes before a people remembers that it is allowed to make its own sound. And then, on world after world, the first sounds came, uncertain and small and entirely their own, and the galaxy that the Iron Choir had ruled, by holding its breath for 900 years, began, at last, to breathe. And 4 jumps past the border, in the deep dark where the treaty promised there was nothing at all, one scarred gray ship settled back into its long patience, and shut down its lights, and waited, the way it had been built to wait, for the next order to kneel, and the next chance to answer it.